I booked a tiny cottage up the hill from Main Street in Jerome because I wanted a weekend that felt contained. I'd been through town once years earlier on a drive between Prescott and Cottonwood, and the way the houses clung to the hillside stayed with me. Porches stacked over porches, switchback stitched into the slope, galleries that looked like they could slide if you breathed on them. The listing showed a little place with a narrow deck and a view straight across the Verde Valley. The owner messaged me a door code and a note about parking. Pull in nose first, leave room for the neighbor. Don't block the old stone steps that run behind the cottage. Historic access, she called them. Miners used to cut across there. Locals still do. I didn't think much of it at the time. The photos showed carved steps notched into rock and patched with concrete, then a faint path climbing towards scrub and broken tailings. It reads as a shortcut to view. We rolled in late morning on a Friday and did the usual small town loop. Park, walk Main, split a sandwich from the corner place, look in windows we couldn't afford to buy from, wander through a tiny museum with a few rusted tools under glass. By mid-afternoon, we were sitting on the deck with 2 cold drinks, trying to name the plants on the slope behind us. I knew creosote from visits down near the desert floor, but up here the brush was a mix. Stiff manzanita with red bark, some juniper, low oak that snagged your pants if you got too close, bunchgrass tufts that looked dead until wind moved through them. The air had that dusty sweetness you get where rock bakes all day, and every so often a motorcycle wound the switchbacks, and the sound bounced around the canyon like it was testing the walls. The cottage had a guest binder with the usual tips. Quiet hours, a reminder to keep the deck gate latched because of javelis, a map of how to walk to coffee without walking on the highway. There was a 1-page flyer from the Historical Society about the town's mines and the tunnels everyone says are still down there somewhere below the houses. Shafts braced with old timber pockets where the ground has slumped and left odd soft places under the grass. The owner had underlined a line about staying on marked routes and not following game trails. I figured that was aimed at people who hike off with cameras and come back covered in cactus spines. I wasn't planning to bushwalk. The plan was a nap, an early dinner, maybe live music later if we felt it. By late in the afternoon, we both got that heavy feeling you get from sitting too long. The sun dropped behind the ridge and the heat let go just enough that you could stand in it without thinking about shade. My friend said, "I'm going to stretch my legs before we eat." And I said, I'd go, too. We left our phones charging, locked the door behind us, and walked around the side of the cottage to those old steps. They felt older than they looked from the deck. Uneven treads, some half crumbled, a handrail once there and gone now, just round holes where posts had been. The steps climbed between the back fences of 2 lots, then turned against a raw slope where the hillside had been cut to make room for houses 100 years ago. Someone had set a few railroad ties as water bars. After 20 feet, the steps stopped and a miner's path took over, the kind you see in places where feet picked a line and never changed it. The cut bank rose to our left and dropped away to our right. Through gaps, you could see the road's switchbacks and in the far distance, the long smear of the valley floor. We weren't more than 5 minutes up when something changed. It was small. My friend jerked and cursed and looked down at his ankle like a bee had stung him. I looked too and saw a thin line strung high between 2 scrub branches, almost invisible until you found it with the eye, and then you couldn't unsee it. He took a quick step back and it tightened across his sock, bit for a second, and snapped. The sound it made wasn't loud, but it was the sound of something meant to be felt. A sharp twang pop that belonged to fishing gear, not a hillside cut. I followed the line with my eyes and saw where it had been anchored in a split stick driven into hard dirt. A few yards ahead, 3 empty cans rattled from another line tied across the faint trail, wired through holes punched under their rims. The cans were dusty, not new, but the holes were punched clean, and the wire wasn't rusted. It wasn't Park Service stuff. It wasn't historic. It was someone's fresh warning system. We both went very still without talking. We were in that space above town where you're technically still among houses, but distance is strange and sound travels in ways that surprise you. The hillside fell away so abruptly that if you took 2 steps the wrong way, you'd end up sliding on dust and rock. And if you called out, you wouldn't know who exactly would hear. I think we both had the same thought at the same time. This was not for coyotes. This was human height, human placement, human intent. My stomach flipped. I said, "Let's go back." And we turned in the same motion, ready to pick our way down and tell the owner the steps needed a sign. We had time to take 1 step, maybe 2. A figure in a brown jacket stepped up from a cut in the hillside we hadn't registered on the way up and started toward us at a steady pace. He wasn't up to the mark. He was lateral to us, coming from a little seam in the slope where the roots of a juniper clutched a hollow. The man didn't say a word. He didn't make a big show. He moved like he expected us to freeze in place so he could get to us before we got our feet under us. He kept one hand in his pocket and the other where I could see it. The pocket hand bothered me more than the one I could see. For a second, some part of me reached for the script you fall back on in normal life. "Hey, sorry, we didn't know this was your..." And then my eyes tracked the rest of the slope and all of that polite momentum died. There were other lines. Once you distinguish that thin nylon from the mess of stems and shadows, you see it everywhere. A loop at ankle height where the path narrowed around a rock. A line of cans hung lower, ready to rattle if you ducked the higher one, to short branches set at hip height with freshwater cuts. The work was recent. Whoever did it knew where a person would have to step if they wanted to pass without sliding out from under themselves. And they'd sewn those places shut with trip lines. We cut sideways because that was the only direction not stitched with wire. The idea was to drop back toward town and hit the next set of steps or a fence or anything human enough that we could shout to someone on a porch and make sense to them. The slope was worse than it looked. Dust held together until it didn't. The path we chose wasn't a path, it was a suggestion. Look tugged at pant legs and the rock fragments were shaped wrong for feet. Sharp where you wanted them flat. We moved fast because the brown jacket moved fast. He didn't run. He didn't have to. He picked up speed and ate our margin like he'd practiced for it. A can clattered behind us. Another line tightened against my shin and burned through the skin as it snapped. And I lost enough balance that I had to throw a hand down to keep my face out of the dirt. My friend reached for me and I shook him off because the test there wasn't kind. It was keeping us both upright and pointed in the same direction. We both heard the rattle of cans a second time closer. And then the clean silence of nothing jangling because he was moving inside his own grid without touching anything. We went where the hillside let us go. It funneled us. The only open run was toward a band of concrete that revealed itself under dust. Some old stabilization work just wide enough to count as stairs where the slope steepened into a chute. The concrete had been poured in steps like someone carrying a 4x8 sheet of plywood used it as a form and worked down the hill one panel at a time. The top edges were broken. Loose rock had settled on them like someone trying to erase the fact of their existence. We hit it because there was no other way that didn't check a box in his setup and because gravity was doing half the work and we weren't going to argue with it. The man closed more distance, then stopped moving fast and just moved with purpose. He stayed off the concrete and kept to dirt, which told me he knew his footing there and didn't need the stairs. I didn't want to know what his hand held in that pocket. I knew enough. My mind flashed images of knives because the pocket bulged and because that's what you picture when someone corrals you with an offhand setup like this. I didn't see a gun. I didn't assume I'd see it if he had one. The stairs fell straight to the street like a chute someone cast decades ago when washing out a gully seemed like a fix. We rode them down upright, the way you jog a steep stair when not jogging means momentum will take you anyway. My heel slipped once on dust over the concrete and my knee barked when it hit a lip. My friend got ahead of me and then checked himself so we didn't knock each other down. The air felt cooler at each landing because shade started to collect between houses. Somewhere below us, a band hit a snare drum and a mic squealed. The sound came up clean and normal, which made it feel like we were running downhill through two separate versions of the same town. We burst out onto a sidewalk that looked like any mountain town sidewalk in the late afternoon, to people smoking outside a bar. One guy propped a door with a case of beer, a chalkboard sign offering something with green chili. The bar's door was swung open to vent heat, but we still hit it like you hit a barrier you were grateful to put between you and the last 30 seconds. I pulled the handle so hard it banged the wall. A two-piece was on stage doing a sound check, and the singer had that look people get when they don't know if a thing happening in front of them the bit or real. I said, "Call the police," and my voice came out the way it does when wind empties you, too loud with a burr of panic underneath. The bartender didn't ask questions and didn't fumble. He reached under the bar and hit a button like he'd practiced it. And then he stepped out from behind the taps to put himself between us and the door with the towel still on his shoulder. "Sit," he said, meaning sit where I can see you and where you can see the door. He poured water without asking. I sucked air and watched the rectangle of daylight like a screen. No one followed us inside. The empty street beyond looked like a place where nothing bad ever finished its plan, which I know is a lie in any town, but it's a lie you hold on to when your legs shake. The two smokers outside leaned in the doorway and looked uphill like they were friends of ours deciding whether to laugh. Yavapai County deputies rolled up in under 10 minutes. I clocked the numbers not because I was grading the response, but because time had gone strange and I needed pegs to hang it on. The bartender pointed at us as if to give the deputies permission to skip the part where they had to guess who asked for them. We stepped outside without being told so the music wouldn't compete with the next part. The deputies were young, squared away, belts neat, no strain showing. One asked if anyone was hurt. My friend pushed down his sock to show the line burn and a little blood. I lifted my knee and showed the gray smear where concrete had kissed it. "No needles," the deputy said without drama. And he had the band carry on as usual while we moved to the side. We told it straight. We didn't have to sell it because we weren't trying to make it bigger than it was. We walked up behind the cottage. We tripped a line. We saw Kins hung to rattle. A man appeared from a cut in the bank in close distance with one hand in his jacket pocket. We saw more lines. We cut across the slope to drop to town and kept hitting those lines. We found concrete stairs. We took them down. We came into the bar. That was the whole thing. The deputy asked for the address of the cottage and where the steps began. He repeated back the details he needed to remember. Behind the cottage, historic steps, faint miner's path line at shin height. He called another unit to the hillside before we were finished and asked if we could show them. I said yes out of a reflex to be useful, and then my body answered the question again with a slower truth or no. He read that on my face and said, "We'll walk the stairs with you. You don't have to go off the concrete." We went as a group, two deputies, the two of us, the bartender on his threshold watching, the smokers pretending to be more involved with their cigarettes than with us. The deputy in front moved steady, eyes where they needed to be, back loose. He reached the first landing and stopped, hand up in a way that was more courtesy than command. He pointed with his chin into the brush just off the concrete where the faint path resumed. The other deputy stepped past him and used a flashlight even though the light was good. The beam picked up 3 lines in about a 6 FT run. One at shin height that crossed the pinch point by a boulder. One at knee height you'd catch if you tried to step over the first. One low just above the dirt that would snag a toe if you tried to be clever. It wasn't elaborate in the sense of a movie trap. It was patient and placed where your eyes wouldn't be until after your feet were. The front deputy called something short and clear on his radio, and within another minute, a third car slid in at the top of the block, angled up toward the origin point of the steps. I had a sudden stupid thought about how foolish we must look in shorts and dumb hiking shoes, standing next to professionals with vests and tools. I also had a thought less stupid that the hillside we had crossed in a hurry was not neutral ground. It belonged to someone in the way a coroner in a store belongs to no one in particular until a person chooses it, and then it belongs to them until someone else tells them to move. The deputy took one more slow step off the concrete and then stepped back. "All right," he said, "we'll take it from here." They had us wait at the bottom of the stairs. We leaned on the bar's shade wall, where it was cool, and watched while one deputy went up the steps. Nah, not on them, but close enough to keep eyes on anyone moving. The other cut across a little lower where the slope led him. They pick their spots like people who do this for a living and feel the need to prove how brave they are to anybody. 2 more minutes and a voice snapped from up the slope. Nothing panicked, just the tone you use to say that's him without saying that's him. Another call came from a different angle, and then it all slowed down in a way that told me they had him. They came back later with a small backpack, and I could shake the feeling that the pocketed hand mattered. The backpack had been sitting just inside a hollow we hadn't registered from above. Canvas stained with dirt. One strap was repaired with duct tape. Zipper pulls tied with the same line that had stung my friend's ankle. They opened it on the trunk of the car with simple movements like this was bread and butter stuff and not a strange story. Inside they laid out cut line, a roll of the same kind of wire that held the cans, a folding knife, and several wallets that weren't his. The knife was an exotic, a hardware store knife, scuffed, blade cleaned, but not polished. The kind of thing you buy at a register because you need it now. The wallets were ordinary, too, which didn't make them better. They had credit cards and IDs in them with names that had nothing to do with the man in the brown jacket. The man himself sat cuffed in the back of a cruiser with his head tipped toward the ceiling like he was looking for something up there. The door was open and a deputy stood with a boot on the sill. His face was tired the way faces get when someone has made their piece of the day harder than it needed to be. The man's jacket was corduroy, faded to a color that used to be brown and was now the color of dirt. His hand was out of his pocket and his nails were chewed down. He looked like someone who had lived outside for a while and learned which hollows stayed dry in a thunderstorm. He didn't look up at us and we didn't look long at him. It wasn't rubbernecking material. It was a man who'd made the slope his and didn't want visitors. A deputy told us in the plain sentences cops use when they don't want to add weight to what already has enough, that the man had been living in a collapsed tunnel mouth above town. He had wired the approaches with lines he could see and everyone else would miss until it was too late. He knows the hillside better than anyone who walks it twice a week. The deputy said he didn't say trespassers or idiots. He said it neutrally. He told us there had been a string of break-ins on the streets just below the slope. Cars, back porches, a couple of unlocked doors in the morning where someone had stepped in and taken a wallet off a hall table while coffee was brewing. Might finally make sense, he said. He didn't turn toward the cruiser when he said it, but the meaning was clear. We finished our statements on the hood of his car. He watched our pens like a teacher who's there to help you spell. He had us mark a quick map of the steps, where we noticed the first line, where the cans were, where we turned. I felt my hands steady while I drew, because the act of putting lines on paper under someone else's eye brings you back into a normal day. He took photos of my friend's ankle and my knee. He asked if we wanted medical treatment. We said no. He said they'd file this alongside the other calls they were now connecting to this man and that we might hear from someone down the line. He kept it simple. He didn't tell us to shrug it off, and he didn't try to make it a bigger story than it was. He took care with his words in a way that made the ground level under my shoes again. We asked quietly if we should go back to the cottage or find somewhere else. The deputy looked up the hill at the steps. He looked at our legs. He looked back at the cruiser and the man inside. If it were me, he said, I'd stay somewhere flatter tonight. We'll have a car sit on the steps until a crew can pull the lines, but I don't want you walking around there after dark if you don't have to. That felt like permission to do what I already wanted. We thanked the bartender and he waved it off like he just refilled a beer. We crossed to the motel on the other side of the street, the kind with 2 floors and a railing that buzzed under your hand from the day's heat still in it. I walked back to the cottage with a deputy before sundown to pack our things. It wasn't a march, it was slow. We didn't take the steps. We went the long way around on the sidewalk on the road, and we carried one bag each. So, it didn't feel like a moving day. The deputy walked a half step behind me and one lane off the shoulder and talked about nothing we needed to remember. He pointed out the view like a tour guide and asked if we'd eaten at the pizza place yet. It was a way of saying, I'm here without saying I'm here. At the cottage, I locked the door and left the code programmed in the keypad like I found it. On the way back, a patrol car idled at the bottom of the steps with its windows down and a face inside lit blue by a screen. Night in that motel felt strange in small ways. The AC cycled like a breath you couldn't pin to a body. A car worked the switchbacks and the sound climbed the hill, dropped into a pocket, then climbed again out of sync with where the tail lights were. My friend moved his sock and checked his ankle enough times that I told him he was going to pick at it raw. We didn't turn on the TV. We didn't drink. We sat with the door cracked until the whole way the air smelled like someone else's deodorant. Then we shut the door. It wasn't a horror movie night. It was just a narrow room on a hillside where our bodies still thought they were moving even when they were still. I slept hard in bursts and woke up with a start twice, heart thudding like I'd missed a step. In the morning, we walked to coffee on the street the owner had underlined in the binder. It was good to be among people doing regular morning things. Folks are kind in that small town way of letting you be. You could tell a few had heard something. Where travels and a cruiser parked where the stone steps began made for talk. But no one asked. We stood by the window that looked up the canyon and watched a county truck nose in at the base of the slope. 3 workers got out wearing gloves and bright vests that turned them into clear shapes against dirt. They didn't posture. They fanned out and moved in that careful way of people taking apart work that could look like nothing until it cuts you. We watched them gather the trip lines off the slope. They didn't bag them like evidence. They coiled them like things that had been asked to do a job they weren't meant for and were done now. A deputy we hadn't met walked in for his own coffee and nodded to us the way people do when they've been briefed on a thing you did not ask to be part of. He said the man would be held for now and that detectives would work to connect the dots with the break-ins. He didn't give us a name. He didn't need to. He asked if we were checking out or staying, and we said we were leaving after breakfast. Good visit otherwise. He asked, and I surprised myself by saying yes, because it had been until it wasn't. And now again, sitting in the sun with a cup warming my hand, it tilted back toward normal. We took the long way to the car so I could look up at the hillside from the street and make peace with the angle of it. In full daylight, with 3 people in vests moving at a human pace and a patrol car idling where the steps began. The slope looked like any other patch of rock and brush on this mountain. The kind of place you'd climb a little way to take a photo and then come down in time for lunch. From that angle, you couldn't see the cut in the bank where the man had stepped out. You couldn't see the hollow that swallowed a backpack. You couldn't see the single points on the ground where a foot has to land. If the body attached to it wants to keep its wrist safe and its shoulder unrolled, you had to know where to look. Yesterday, we didn't know. Today, I didn't want to. Back at the cottage, I took one last look at the deck with its view over the valley. The light made everything flatter and friendlier. I left the owner a note in the app explaining where we'd gone and what we'd seen, and that I appreciated the warning in her binder about the steps. I told her we were checking out a day early and not to worrying about the second night fee. She wrote back quickly and said she was relieved we were all right, that she'd add a line to the listing until the city posted a sign, and that she'd comp the night anyway. That small kindness sealed something for me that the patrol car couldn't. It felt like the town closing a loop. We loaded the car and didn't make a ceremony of leaving. We didn't have to. We drove out past the museum and the shops and the places that make a living off people like us coming to look at the past and the view. On the first switch back down, I glanced up and saw the crew packing coils of line into a bin in the back of their truck. The hillside looked normal again, daylight on rock and brush. and the patrol car still sat where the stone steps began. I didn't feel triumphant or shaken anymore. I felt like people had done their jobs, and a little corner of the slope had been turned back into a cut anyone could use without tripping a wire meant to make you stop. On the highway below town, my friend peeled his sock and checked his ankle one more time before he laughed at himself and pulled it up. We didn't talk about what we could have done differently. There wasn't anything that needed reworking in words. We'd seen the lines, we'd read them correctly, we'd moved. Other people took it the rest of the way. That was enough. We pointed the car toward the wide run of the valley and drove until the mountain's shadow was behind us. We cut over to Boone, North Carolina on the back way because we were being stubborn about traffic and because my cousin has this thing about seeing the old roads. It was that in between weekends, too chilly for tube floats on the new, too warm for ski crowds when the air smells like wood smoke somewhere you can't see and the ridge lines already have a few orange scars in the green. We'd left my aunt's place outside Deep Gap later than we meant to, trying to make it to Boone for dinner before the restaurants got busy with college kids. He kept saying, "Let's take meat camp. It'll be nicer than sitting behind brake lights on the highway." And I didn't argue. I like those turns when the pavement narrows and it feels like the woods lean in just to see who's coming through. We stopped once at a little store with faded Pepsi signs and a hand-altered board that promised bait, ice, and country ham biscuits if you got there early enough. We grabbed sodas and a pack of peanut butter crackers, stretched our legs, and watched a couple of trucks nose in and out. The parking lot dust tasted like chalk. When we pulled back onto the road, the sun was low enough that every bend flashed us with a strobe of branches. Maybe a mile past the store, a white pickup with a steel bumper and a dull, beat-up camper shell eased out from a side turn and tucked in behind us. It didn't roar up or crowd me. Nothing you could point to in a mirror and say, "That right there." It just slotted itself into our groove and stayed there. We told ourselves it was nothing. Folks follow folks onto lane roads all the time because there aren't many places to pass and nobody wants to push a downshift on a blind curve. But it's funny how a car behind you becomes a person when it doesn't peel off where you expect. We went by a church lot that had a marquee about a bake sale and a revival schedule and pasted a small clearing with rolled hay bales and around one little pasture where you always see a sorrel horse swishing flies. The truck hung on. No attempt to get around us on a straight stretch. No swing into one of the gravel driveways that looked like they led to a house back in the trees. It kept the same polite, patient distance that after 5 or 6 minutes starts to feel like a decision. Maybe he's headed to Todd or Zanville, my cousin said, like that would explain it. People live up here their whole lives. Then why didn't he pass on that last straight? I asked it easy not to start a thing. I kept my speed respectable and both hands on the wheel. The road narrowed to one of those sections where the ditch is a skinny trench and the edge of the asphalt looks bitten. "He's not riding your bumper," my cousin said, and we let that carry a little weight. I fiddled with the fan because the windshield had the faintest film on it that shows up right when the light goes bad. The first stars poked through in the deep wedge of sky over the road. I told myself that in 10 minutes we'd hit a run of driveways and mailboxes, and that would be that. We came to one of those gravel turnouts that don't look like much. Just a scooped-out place where a logging track or a dozer cut once connected. The kind of spot where you can tuck in to answer a text or let a speed demon fly by. I flipped on my blinker mostly for my own sense of order and rolled into the turnout, bumping over washboard ruts in a half-buried beer can. The plan was to wave him around, make it his decision, and remove the guessing. The gravel was loose and pale. My headlights lit up the brush, and the mouth of a track that narrowed fast into scrub and saplings. The main road ran past, dark ribbon, empty ahead. The white pickup slowed like it was going to pass. Then the brake lights held steady and instead of continuing, it doglegged right after us, nosed in, and killed its lights in one smooth, practice motion. The engine stayed on. You don't know a noise until you hear it without seeing what's making it. The idle had a damp, heavy sound, like it had been working already that day. The driver's door opened and a big man stepped down. He shut the door with his hip. Ball cap pulled low, squared shoulders in a brown jacket, jeans with grease stains that didn't look new. He didn't call out. He walked up to my side like a guy who'd been on porches where you had to start talking before the dog made up its mind. The second the beam from my headlights caught his face, I looked away on instinct, like looking straight would be too much of an invitation. He kept coming until he was close enough for me to see scabs across his knuckles. "Hey," he said, and the word was friendly enough. "Saw some smoke off your tail like you got fluid burning. Do you mind if I take a look?" "Quick." My cousin sat still with his hands flat on his thighs. I had the window halfway down. The guy gave me a smile that didn't reach his eyes, and it wasn't a sinister thing so much as a dry one, like he'd used this line before and knew it usually worked. He didn't look at my cousin. He kept drifting his body angle toward the passenger side like he was trying to talk past me to get a good look inside. The truck behind us breathed diesel. "We're good," I said. "Appreciate it, though." I kept my voice steady and boring, like a bank teller. The gravel turnout felt suddenly smaller. The logging track to our right looked rutted and damp, with small branches hanging low over it like a mouth with uneven teeth. "Won't take a second," he said, and put his palm flat against the glass. As I reached for the switch, not a hard press, just enough to say the window belonged to his hand for the second he needed to finish his thought. I smelled oil and cold air. My cousin turned his head just enough to catch my eye quickly, and then looked past me through my door mirror. "Hey," my cousin said, quietly, "not for the man. Look at that chain." At first, it was just a black line against darker ground, right where the track narrowed. A heavy chain ran across the logging road 3 feet in from the gravel lip, dressed with brush, spruce boughs and cuttings laid over it to make it look like nothing. The chain sagged just enough that a bumper would go up over it and then drop. And that drop would be where you'd sit. Behind it, the track sloped to a muddy pocket where tires could polish themselves useless. My brain had this fast little wheel spin of pictures. The nose of my car stuck over that chain, me trying to rock it. The white pickup then pulled in to help by blocking the exit. Doors, hands, the heavy breath of 2 engines. I looked back at the man. He wasn't looking at the chain. He was looking at my cousin now, measuring him like you measure a fence before you hop it. Over his shoulder, I could see the passenger in the pickup, a shape more than a face, leaning forward like he was adjusting something on the dash. The interior light hadn't come on when the driver got out. That means the switch had been clicked off, which is the kind of thing you do when you want to be able to open a door without lighting yourself up. That's when the little click in my head got loud enough to hear. "We're good," I said again, and I made my voice lighter. "Going to roll onto town. Thank you, though." The man's palm was still on the glass. "Just pop the hood," he said, easy as if we'd asked him for directions. And he shifted closer so his jacket brushed the door. "Smoke means a leak. Leak means fire if you're unlucky. Time does weird things when you want it to speed up." I could feel the engine in my floorboard. And the only thing between him and the lock switch for my door was my shoulder. I don't know if I would have outmuscled him at that angle. I don't know if I would have thought to jam my knee under the handle. I do know that watching his eyes try to land on everything inside my car while his hands stayed flat told me he needed the seconds I should give him. My cousin didn't raise his voice. He said, "Now, like we'd practiced it and like it belonged to both of us." I dropped the shifter into reverse and pressed down. The man's hand slid on the glass, then popped free with a soft thud of skin losing contact. He stumbled 1 step and I gassed it harder than I'd wanted to. The rear wheels spit loose gravel back in a spray and I felt the car shimmy. For a second, the front end drifted toward the chain across the track and the steering got light the way it does on marbles. I cranked the wheel, the nose swung, and we shot backwards at a sloppy angle past the white pickup's front bumper. As the driver cussed and hopped away from the corner of the headlight spread, my foot hit the brake, jerked it into drive, and we lunged back out onto meet camp like a fish breaking out of a net. The white pickup's headlights flared behind us, and then they were coming. No more polite distance, no more waiting. I heard the passenger door of the truck slam, and then its engine spooled, a hard, ugly snarl that made my rearview mirror buzz. I kept the car glued to the outside line of the lane, eyes forward, hands tight enough that my thumbs hurt. The road ahead did that mountain thing where it was either a right-hander or a prayer. I chose the line I knew. There's a kind of stupid clever that makes you want to cut a turn and kill your lights and let them go by. We didn't even flirt with that. We aimed for Boone like it was a lighthouse instead of a college town, and we were the only boat out. I called out what I was doing. Braking, turning right, back on, because narrating kept me from making the kind of hard snap that rolls you. My cousin said, "You're good, you're good," like somebody spotting you when you back a trailer. They stayed so close that their eyes lit the inside of our car blue. I didn't check the speedometer, but we were faster than we should have been. There was nobody else on the road for a string of miles. The church lots had gone black, and the few porch lights we passed didn't feel like help. I waited for the tap. That first bump from their hitch on my bumper. It didn't come. They paced us like they wanted us to do it for them. Leave the road. Misjudge the curve. Give them a wreck they didn't have to make. Next lighted place. My cousin said, "We don't stop unless there are people outside." "You're calling 911, I said, and he already had the phone in his hand. I heard him talk, calm, giving the route, the mile markers and landmarks. He knows the names of haulers the GPS doesn't. He said, "White pickup, dull camper shell, steel bumper, driver in a brown jacket, passenger unknown," and then he said our names. I kept my eyes where the dark became lighter, bend by bend, like the road was a zipper and we were yanking it open. The first smear Boone's edge happened in a blink. The glow that means gas pumps and fast food, and the drop in your stomach that comes with the decision you have to make at speed. The truck was still there in my mirror, but their lights didn't look as big with all the other ones around them. I told my cousin, "Hold on," and shot the next right into a gas station lot that was bright enough to make you squint. I cut across to empty pumps and a splotch of broken glass, rolled under the main canopy, and threw it in part crooked. So I was perpendicular to the doors. I laid on the horn and didn't let up. It felt like it was coming from my ribs. My cousin was out the door and into the store before I could say anything. A guy fueling a Ford truck flinched like he'd been burned. The noise rolled over the station and into the road. The white pickup flashed by at the entrance, broke it, was considering something and decided against it. It slowed down by the road cut, paused in the wash of the street light, and then crawled forward and kept going. It didn't turn into the lot across the street or pull into the next one. It simply flowed back into the stream like it had been nothing. If you just pulled up and saw that, you wouldn't have thought a thing. Inside the store, the clerk looked like he wished he was anywhere else, but did the right thing anyway. He was on the phone before my cousin finished explaining. A couple of college kids with cases of seltzer stood there open-mouthed. I stayed with the car because it felt like the only thing that separated us from something worse, and because I didn't want to make it easy for anyone to hop in. My knees shook so hard I had to shove both feet flat on the floor to make it stop. Watauga County deputies rolled up faster than I expected, lights casting this white-blue wash over the ground that made the gravel glow. One pulled up to the curb out front, the other sweated the entrance, the nose into a slot by the air machine like he'd been there 100 times. The one who stepped out near me was mid-40s, hairline retreating, wedding ring-catching light. He had that calm tone you get when you have to move quickly without making someone feel like they were failing. "You the caller?" he asked. "Either of you hurt?" We weren't. We said it out loud, which helped. I gave him the road in order, and my cousin gave him the details I'd missed. The way the passenger's door light hadn't come on, the chain across the turn, the brush on it, the scabs on the driver's knuckles, The round dent near the tail light on the pickup that looked like a trailer had backed into it once. The deputy wrote the kind of notes that aren't theatrical, just a pencil making loops. "You did right coming to a lit public place," he said. And that was the first moment I felt anything like relief. He told his radio where he was and asked for the second unit to run the meat camp slowly toward the store we'd left, checking the turnouts and pull-offs. He asked us for our IDs, and then when he handed them back said, "We get some of this with students sometimes, but the chain on the logging track, well, that's not kids being stupid." It was the first time anyone had said it out loud besides us. He didn't try it on for drama, he just said it there. We sat under the awning while the store settled back into its hum. A couple more cars came and went. One of the college kids asked if he could pet the deputy SK9 and was told very nicely that he could not. I turned the engine off and then on again because the sound of it going quiet made the world too big. An hour is a long time when you're trying to decide if you still in a moment or if the moment has let you go. We told the story to a second deputy who arrived to swap out the first. And then we told it again on the phone because the dispatcher had questions about plate numbers, which we didn't have, and about whether there had been any visible weapons, which we didn't see. My cousin drank a Gatorade like it was the only thing that counted as a task. When the deputy came back, he had that look people get when they don't want to spook you, but think you should know. He asked if we minded driving a couple minutes to eyeball a vehicle they'd found. We followed him, and the second unit slipped in behind us like a shepherd keeping skittish sheep from the ditch. We turned into a little industrial area with low buildings and roll-up doors and a stretch of cracked pavement behind them where the dumpsters sit. There, under a dead security light, a white pickup idled behind a closed warehouse door. The engine was running. There were no headlights on. The dull camper shell had a sliding window with a bit of duct tape on one corner. The bumper had that hard steel square look. On the quarter panel near the tail light, there was a round dent the size of a fist. If it wasn't the same truck, it was trying very hard to look like it. The deputies had already been there long enough to see what was inside. They didn't pull us in close. They kept us back and asked us simple yes-no stuff, and we said what we could say without making anything up. The cab held the usual working man debris: burger wrappers, a lunch pail, a car hard cap tossed onto the bench seat, and a plastic tote tucked on the floorboards. In the back under the shell, there was a milk crate with a handful of zip ties, a small pry bar with orange paint rubbed off the tip, and a box that had license plates in it and not the kind of plates you collect for a barn wall. I saw them because the deputy tilted the crate enough that you could miss the corner of a tag with the month sticker scuffed. The smell that came off the truck was oil and old rope and damp cardboard. The deputy with the receding hairline asked us to step back to our car while he and his partner did what they needed to do. We did. The second unit killed the truck's engine, and an awful silence fell that made the cricket sound loud. The warehouse they were parked behind had a company name painted on the door that meant nothing to me, and if I hadn't been standing there because of what we'd been through, I would have forgotten that place existed 5 seconds after we drove away. They towed the truck. I don't know what happened to the men. The deputies didn't make promises. At the station, we told the story in an office that had an old coffee smell and a calendar with a picture of a waterfall nowhere near town. We gave the same details 3 times and signed to places, and then one more because they thought of a thing they demissed. We used the bathroom and splashed our faces in the sink and tried not to think about the moment the man's palm had been on the glass, and my brain had let that be true. When we finally got back on the road to finish what had started as a 30-minute drive, the world had shifted half an inch, and I could feel the grind of it in everything. We tucked ourselves into a line of cars without discussing it. Safety and numbers isn't always true, but it felt like armor that night. We didn't take the scenic route through anything. We kept to the main drag where the boon turns into itself with all the usual hassles. We parked under lights. We ate inside near the kitchen doors and didn't have a beer, even though one had sounded good 3 hours earlier. For weeks afterward, I would catch myself checking my mirrors in a way I hadn't before, scanning more than I needed to. I'd see a pickup and feel that little clutch in my stomach and then tell myself to settle down. We told our aunt and she made a face that says she's going to pray for you and also wishes you'd been less free with your choices. We told a friend who works nights and he said he'd been seeing a truck like that up on the Ridge Road turnouts. Not doing anything illegal, though much as orbiting where women park to watch the sunset. He said he'd start noting plates. Maybe that means something. Maybe the same white pickup is for different trucks. And the thing that makes it scary is that it doesn't have to be the same people for the setup to be the same. I think about the chain more than anything. Not the chase. Not the fuel stop where the clerk held the phone like a lifeline. Not the blue wash of police lights on the concrete. The chain, the brush laid across it in an even way, not thrown. Someone had stood there in daylight and arranged that line so it would catch you when the shadows got up and the world became a shade flatter. That wasn't impulse, that was patience. And if I start to spiral on why would someone set a trap like that on a back road that mostly sees church folks and workers and students, I don't like where it goes. I don't want to know what they had planned to pop the hood. The human imagination can be a nasty multi-tool if you feed it specifics. I'm not here with rules or survival lessons or advice. That sounds like something stitched on a pillow for a cabin. It's not that neat. We weren't clever. We didn't outsmart anyone. We got lucky that now meant the same thing for both of us. And that the gravel gave us enough slip to avoid the chain and enough bite to make the turn. I'm grateful for 100 boring things, working brakes, a gas station that hadn't closed early, a clerk who didn't freeze, deputies who knew their roads and didn't talk down to us. I'm grateful the truck rolled by instead of turning in, even though I don't know if that happened because of us, or because something else pulled at them, or because they decided the angle wasn't clean anymore. Sometimes I drive that way again, because life is life, and you can't turn every road into a ghost. I slow at that same turnout because you always slow at the scene of a scare the way you slow where you've seen a deer jump out. The track is just a track now. Or B, it always was and the chain is gone. Or B, it never was there again. Once in daylight, I saw fresh cuts on saplings near the mouth and thought about how small a thing has to be to reroute a night. Once after rain, I saw tire marks I couldn't read. Mostly, it's just a place where a bad feeling happens. I didn't know if the men in that white pickup were the men with the truck behind the warehouse. I couldn't swear on anything that would hold up in a court of law. I know what I saw and I know how it felt, and I know what the deputies found in a vehicle that looked enough like the one that chased us to make my skin do that cold creep. Maybe they were running stolen plates. Maybe they were picking locks on storage bays. Maybe the zip ties were for tarps, and the pry bar was for pallets, and the license plates were part of a junker-esque collection he hadn't gotten around to mounting on his shed wall. Maybe the chain with the brush over it is the part that takes all those May and sets them gently on a shelf out of reach. We made the report. We drove home the long way, the normal way, the crowded way. We told the story and then tried not to tell it again because telling it brings the smell of oil and cold air back like a trick of the nose. If you ever up on meat camp at dusk and a white pickup rides your line without passing and there's a little turnout with a logging track that looks convenient, do yourself a favor and keep going until there are more eyes on you than just the ones in your mirror. To the big man in the brown jacket who put his hand on my window and told me to pop the hood, wherever you were going that night, whatever you had planned, whatever you thought you saw in our car, let's not meet. I picked up a little sidewalk last fall through a friend who handles maintenance for a few small places around Stowe. It was straightforward. Check the lodge. Make sure nothing leaks. Keep the heat set low, though pipes don't freeze, and be a warm body on site a couple nights while the owners were out of state lining up staff for ski season. I wasn't hired as security. There wasn't a uniform or a badge. They just liked having someone they knew walk the halls and turn lights on and off. so it looked occupied when the leaves were down and the parking lot was empty. I had stayed there once in college and remembered the place. A narrow lobby with a counter, a breakfast room with a dozen tables and a waffle iron, a short corridor of ground floor rooms closed for repainting, and a fire escape that ran up the back to a second floor with 8 guest rooms and a small linen closet. The owners were a couple from Massachusetts who desunk everything into the property a few years back and were finally having a good winter. They left me a binder with codes, a ring of keys, and a laminated card that listed numbers for the oil company, the plow guy, and the Vermont State Police. There was still a landline on the office desk for when storms knocked out cell service. My job was to sleep on the pull-out couch in the little manager's office, walk the building, and call for help if anything bigger than a tripped breaker happened. The time of year in Stowe, between foliage and the first real snow, feels like a pause. The hiking traffic drops off. The ski shops are setting out new inventory, and a lot of the bigger places shut their restaurants on weeknights. The day I drove up, the notch was already closed for the season, and the sky looked like it wanted to sleep, but couldn't quite commit. I let myself in around mid-afternoon, did a slow circuit with the checklist, and unlocked the supply closet where the spare bulbs in the plunger lived. The heat was set to 55. The boiler thumped once in a while like an old man clearing his throat. A motion light over the back stoop clicked on and off every time a branch moved. The only noise from outside was wet leaves gliding down the asphalt when cars went by on the main road. The owners had left a couple of granola bars, a can of soup, and a note apologizing for the empty fridge. "There's coffee," the note said with a smiley face. That was enough. I don't spook easily in empty buildings. I've worked overnight inventory at chain stores and sad houses for friends with creaky Victorians. The trick is to make the place as small as possible. Shut doors you're not using. Leave a hall light on and keep the things you need within reach. I locked the front door and both side doors. Checked the rear service door twice and slid the steel bolt in the kitchen pass-through that leads to the laundry area. Then I set my bag on the office couch, ran the water in 3 ground floor rooms so the traps wouldn't dry out, and made a sandwich. I spent an hour tightening a loose latch on a window in the breakfast room because the wind kept making it tick. I didn't have to do that, but it felt better to remove one small annoyance from the list. By early evening, the rain settled in. It was the cold, steady kind that turns your cuffs heavy and carries sound in a flat sheet. I set my phone to charge and left the landline pulled close to the edge of the desk. I propped the office door open so I could hear the lobby. It's a short building, maybe 50 feet from front to back, and if you're standing by the office, you can see both the front door and the breakfast room door without moving. A little after dark, the overhead lights blinked and came right back. That wasn't nothing. The last thing I wanted was the heat dropping out and the pipes complaining. So, I found a flashlight, tested it, and pulled the key for the utility room in case I needed to reset a breaker. Then, I poured coffee I didn't need, and told myself to stop looking at the window like it had something to say. The knock came fast and hard, 3 raps in quick succession that made the glass flex in its rubber gasket. It wasn't the way guests knock. It wasn't the half-tap of someone timid about bothering you. It had an edge to it, like the person on the other side was already irritated you hadn't answered. I stepped into the lobby and saw a man on the porch with a bright knit cap pulled down to his eyebrows and a wet jacket zipped to his throat. He had his shoulders hunched, hands jammed under his armpits, and he looked bigger than he probably was because everything he wore was saturated and slick to him. When he saw me, he leaned into the door glass and started talking. I had to cut my ear to catch it through the rain. He said his car had slid into a ditch up the road. He said he needed to come inside to get dry. Those were the exact words, not to use the phone, not to wait for a tow, get dry. He was already looking past me at the lobby heater and the hooks with extra coats on them. It threw me a little. The owners had told me flat out in the binder, do not let anyone in after hours, no matter what the story is. The property's insurance wouldn't cover it. Call for help on their behalf if you want, but the doors stay locked. I picked up the landline and told the man I could call a tow and have them meet him at his vehicle. He shook his head in a fast little jitter I didn't like and said he just needed to step in for a minute. He tried the knob. It was locked. He tried it again harder, then loud enough that it carried. He said he was freezing to death and I was being a jerk. I kept the phone in my hand and told him I was calling for help. I moved back to the office because the front door has a bad habit of sticking if you breathe on it wrong, and I didn't want him to think there was any chance I was about to open it and then feel pressure to follow through. I could hear him moving along the porch boards. The windows rattled one by one as he put his palms against the glass and leaned in to see the rooms. He went to the breakfast room, pressed his face to the pane, and shaded the sides with his hands like he didn't want reflections in his way. Then he slid along to the side entry near the stairs and shouldered it once experimentally. I dialed 911 and told the dispatcher there was a male trying doors at the lodge, that I was alone inside, that he claimed to have slid off the road, and that I didn't feel safe letting him in. I gave the address. The dispatcher asked my name, asked if I had a safe room, and told me to stay where I was, keep the doors locked, and stay on the line. Sometimes you realize a thing has changed because of a sound you didn't know you were listening for. The rain was still going. The little hum from the soda cooler in the breakfast room was still doing its pointless duty. I could hear the guy's wet shoes as he stepped off the porch onto gravel. Then there was a new noise from the rear hallway. Not knocking, not the hard irritated pop of knuckles on wood. It was metal on metal. A flat, steady levied scrape like someone working the seam of a door with a tool and not trying to hide it. The dispatcher heard it too and asked me where it was coming from. I told her the rear service door by the kitchen. It's not a commercial kitchen, just a fridge, a couple of prep tables, and a pass-through to the breakfast room. But the service door is steel with an exterior latch, and an old soft spot in the jamb you learn not to trust. I've opened it with a shoulder myself when the bolt didn't seat. The thought of someone else figuring that out worked on me fast. I hung up the office phone without thinking it through and ran for weight. The breakfast room had a heavy for top with a steel frame and a laminate top that had seen too many coffee mugs. I flipped it, pushed it, and let it scrabble on the tile while I threw my shoulder against it to get it across the hall. It screeched in a way I knew would tell the man exactly where I was, and I didn't care. I jammed the table edge against the service door, then grabbed the rolling wire rack with the cereal dispensers on it and levied it sideways until its feet bit. The noise at the door stopped. It didn't taper. It stopped like someone pulled the tool out and took 3 quiet breaths to think. I held mine and tried to guess whether what came next would be a crash or nothing. What came next was the back motion like clicking on, then off, then on again. Footsteps on the metal stairs. The fire escaped. I had forgotten the fire escape. The rear hall has a narrow interior staircase that runs up to the 2nd floor. At the top of it, there's a window that opens on a hinge if you push the latch sideways with 2 hands and convince the paint to let go. I took the stairs 2 at a time and almost slipped on my own wet shoes. I didn't want him at that window peering in on the 2nd floor landing. Not because there was anything special up there, but because that would mean he defigured out a way to both see me and reach me higher than I wanted to deal with. I needed to make that landing unfriendly without opening the building. I did not have a plan more complicated than delay and noise. There's a maintenance kit in a Rubbermaid tote under the stairs with a couple of reflective triangles, a mess of old extension cords, a socket set that's missing the size you need, and 2 road flares in a taped bundle. I tore the tape with my teeth because my hands were slippery, dropped 1 flare, and took the other up the last 4 steps. The upper hall window, a stubborn thing. It sat there in its frame like it had never moved in its life. I worked the latch left and then right, felt something give and pressed my shoulder to the lower pane until it slid up 6 in and stuck. Cold air pushed in. Rain came sideways in small coins. I could hear the man's boots on the metal treads. Whoever designed the escape had put a little platform at the top for the door that used to open there before they sealed it. You have to come up the last 2 steps blind to whatever's waiting in the landing because the railing runs high and the turn is tight. That worked in my favor for once. I twisted the flare cap with both hands. It didn't give. I wiped my palms on my shirt and tried again. It popped and I felt the striker in the cap give me a little square of gritty certainty. I could see the top of a knit cap come level with the sill. I struck the flare and it barked to life with a hiss that filled the hall and a heat you can't mistake for anything else. I shoved the burning end out the narrow gap, not down into his face or anything that would make this worse in the eyes of anyone who would later ask me to write a statement, but far enough that the smoke and light hit him at the worst possible moment to be climbing slick metal in the rain. He reacted like anyone would. He flinched back hard on a surface that gave him nothing. One knee banged the rail. I heard an ugly thunk of shin on galvanized steel and a human sound that wasn't language. He grabbed for the top rung and slid down to the landing on both feet in a scramble that told me he hadn't expected resistance up high. He swore short close, 2 words, and clanged down the steps out of sight. The flare turned the hall into a red fog. I dropped it on a cookie sheet from the linen closet so it wouldn't scorch the floor and slid the window shut as far as it would go. I could smell the chemical tang and wet smoke on my sleeves. The motion light outside clicked on again, then off, then on. I stood still and tried to hear the difference between someone thinking hard and someone moving away. The phone rang downstairs. I left the flare hissing on the pan, trotted back down, and picked up on the first ring. It was the dispatcher asking if I was safe and telling me a trooper was en route from a few towns over, that weather was slowing him, and that the estimate was not immediate. She asked if I had a way to retreat further if the exterior was compromised. I told her the only place with a solid door and no windows was the boiler room, and that there was no lock on the inside of it. She told me to stay where I could see, keep the line open, and narrate what I heard. For a while, it was just rain. The flare went quiet upstairs and left a little curl of smoke in the hallway that made my eyes run. I propped the office door open with my foot, kept one hand on the landline, and watched the front door and the glow through the breakfast room as if staring could keep both strong. Twice I thought I saw movement against the glare of the side motion light, and twice it was the bush by the parking spaces convincing me they had shoulders. The man didn't come back to the front. He didn't knock again. If he was smart, and he'd been smart enough to go right for the weak door and then choose elevation, he'd also been smart enough to realize he made more noise and taken more time than the story he'd be able to sell when someone else arrived. That didn't mean he'd left. It just meant he'd changed tactics. The dispatcher stayed on with me. She didn't. I felt the silence and I was grateful. She asked me to describe the man slowly. I went over the knit cap, the wet jacket, the age, I guess somewhere mid-30s to mid-40s, and what I'd heard in his voice. She asked whether I'd seen a vehicle. I said no. That the driveway was empty, that he'd mentioned a ditch up the road, and that there were a couple of places where runoff undercut the shoulder this time of year. She asked if I was injured. I said no, except my heart was doing all the work for the rest of me. That got half a laugh from both of us we didn't need, but took anyway. There are small practical details that anchor you when you're waiting for someone else to arrive. I clicked the deadbolt on the office door and then unlocked it again because if I needed to move fast, I didn't want to forget it was locked. I pulled a chair into the hall with the backrest facing the front door because I learned the hard way that if you plant a chair and then get behind it, the first thing you do in a rush is trip on your legs. I checked the rear service door barricade by leaning on the wire rack and feeling the give. It was solid enough to buy me another half-minute, even if the jam gave up completely. I picked up the spare flare and tucked it into the back of my belt. Then reconsidered and set it on the office desk where I would get clever and accidentally sit on it. The blue light showed up like the weather does. First as a reflection on a high window I couldn't see directly, then as a wash across the ceiling, then as the thing itself. They rolled into the lot without drama. No siren, no engine rev or cruiser stopped at an angle that let it illuminate the front of the building, and a second vehicle idled down the road with its hazards on boxing in whatever might be coming from that direction. The dispatcher let me know they were there and signed off with a "stay put until they tell you." I hung up and felt the quiet in the room like a physical change. What I remember about the next 15 minutes is a movement that wasn't mine. The trooper at the door knocked and kept his body off to the side like he'd done it 1,000 times. He asked my name through the glass and asked me to show my hands where he could see them. He had me set the keys on the floor and back away from the door before he unlocked it with his own key. He smelled like damp wool and cold air and competence. He asked if anyone else was inside. I said no. He keyed his shoulder mic and told someone outside that the interior was clear so far and to keep eyes on the back. He and I did a slow room-by-room sweep on the ground floor. The service door was scuffed where the pry had started. There were bright crumbs of old paint and a smear of fresh metal where a tool had worked at the latch plate. The trooper nudged the table and gave the door a shove. It was held. We went upstairs. The flare had burned out and left a little black oval on the cookie sheet that made me grateful I'd had that much forethought. He shined his light along the window frame. There were fresh scuffs on the outside rail from a shoe toe sliding. One small bead of blood where a shin had left a reminder. We stood there and listened. Nothing moved. Outside, another trooper had his light on the tree line and his car angled, so its headlights cut down the shoulder where the ditch ran. He waved the first trooper over and pointed with 2 fingers. A sedan sat for a mile down, cockeyed in the ditch with its nose into wet leaves. You could see where the tire had tried to climb back up and dug itself a little grave. The troopers worked it methodically. One stayed with me. The other went down to the car, checked the plates, and said something short on the radio. "Stolen." That was the word he said when he came back up the incline like it had a taste in his mouth. The man reappeared like people do when they reassure their next sentence will fix the last 10 minutes. He came out of the trees at a jog with his hands high and called out that he'd come to check the lodge because he'd seen lights go weird. He did not use the phrase "get dry" this time. He looked thinner without the porch door between us and smaller in the wash of the headlamps, but he carried the same quickness that had put the tool into the door without a second thought. The troopers let him talk himself into corners he couldn't see. "Where was your phone?" He didn't have one. "Where were you headed?" He didn't know the name of the road he was already on. "Whose car is that?" It belonged to a friend whose name he could not provide. They asked him to turn around and place his hands on the hood. He tried to pivot the conversation like a fish trying for the other side of a net, saying he had a tool that could help if they could just pull him out of the ditch. When he said tool, both troopers looked at each other like a bell had rung. They opened the passenger door of the sedan and produced a crowbar that still had flecks of white paint on the tip that matched the door jamb inside my building. The knit cap and the jacket went into an evidence bag. The man went into cuffs on a calm sentence delivered so evenly it almost sounded like an invitation. Back inside, the first trooper took my statement in the lobby with the patience of someone who knew how to get it right the first time. He didn't hurry me. He asked for exact words when I could remember them. He asked about the flare and whether it had contacted the man's skin. It hadn't. He asked whether the man had at any point gained entry. He had not. He asked for the owner's contact information and called the number on the laminated card himself to leave a message that this was more than a noise complaint. He took photos of the door, the scuff on the rail, and the little dot of blood. He wrote down the make and model of the flare off the cardboard tube because he was the kind of person who doesn't guess. I slept on the office couch with the landline on the desk and the spare flare set where I could touch it in the dark without striking it by accident. Sleep is a generous word for it. I lay there and listened as the building settled back into itself. The motion light clicked on twice after the troopers left, and both times it was branches. Every little noise had a place again, which is the difference between a thing being wrong and a thing being itself. I woke up with my shoes still on, and sweat dried under my arms from an adrenaline that had gone stale. The owner's cousin came in late morning with a key and a tote for a new duvet. She had that tight-lipped family expression of someone who'd heard the message and driven over in the rain because blood is thicker than the idea that anything will be fine if you ignore it. We walked the building together and I showed her the scuff on the door and the upstairs rail. She said last spring someone had tried a similar thing at a different property closer to town and that the troopers thought it was the same kind of person working a loop, looking for an easy way in and a warm place to sit while he decided what else he wanted. I didn't ask what else might be. I didn't need to. Before I left, I put the table back where it belonged, wiped my fingerprints off the cookie sheet because it felt like cleaning up after yourself in a friend's kitchen, and turned the heat back to where it had been. The cousin took the binder and said she'd call the door guy to fix the jam. She asked if I wanted to stay the next night, too, and said she'd understand if I didn't. I told her I'd planned on it and could, but if she had someone else, that was fine. She said she'd let me know by afternoon. I drove out slowly, past the place in the ditch where the car had cut into the sod, and watched the rain moving across the fields in a way that meant winter was far off. The trooper called me 2 days later to say the plates were confirmed stolen. The car wasn't registered to anyone in the man's story, and the pry bar from the passenger floor had enough paint to make the case simple. He didn't tell me charges and I didn't ask. He just said, "You did fine," in a way that acknowledged the part where I had to decide without knowing how long it would take them to get there, whether being polite was worth more than being safe. It wasn't complicated work. What I'd been hired to do? Turn lights on, turn lights off, make the building look like it had a heartbeat. But sitting there with my hand on the landline and a flare bleeding smoke into the hall, it felt like the simplest version of the job and the only version that mattered. Keep the doors locked and stay inside until help arrives. I went back up once more before the lift started spinning. It was daylight and cold, and the lodge smelled like fresh paint and laundry detergent. New guests would never know the service door had been soft or that the upstairs window was stubborn. The cousin showed me a metal plate a handy man had added to the jam, a little armor where the wood had given too easily, and we both nodded at it like a brace on a mended bone. She said thank you without making a speech about it. I told her to call me if she needed someone after New Year's. Then I drove home the long way, not because I was shaken, but because I'd learned at 3 o'clock in the morning how the roads around there bend and where the ditch waits if you look away. I didn't need another reminder.